Today, I'm honored to speak with Helga. Helga, you were born in 1940 in Oranienburg, near Berlin, Germany. You began your career as an industrial clerk in East Germany before making a courageous decision in 1963 to escape the DDR, an act that carried the risk of a 6-year prison sentence. In 1965, you successfully made your way to New York City with a green card, and just 1.5 years later, you married an American. Within 5 years, you became a single mother of 3 children after your partner left. Despite the challenges, you built a successful career, earning an associate degree in computer science and working for Citibank for 23 years. Along the way, you faced unimaginable loss with the death of your youngest son at the age of 20. In 1988, in your late 40s, you began to travel the world, ultimately visiting almost every country over the next decades. Now you are very close to that goal. Today, we'll hear more about your incredible experiences, the wisdom you have gathered from a lifetime of overcoming obstacles, and your perspectives on life, travel, and what it truly means to live fully. Welcome, Helga.
Thank you for having me.
How does it sound if I read your story like that?
Good. My life in a nutshell.
Yeah, well, it's over 80 years in a nutshell. It's incredible. I'm so honored to have you today. So, there's so many questions I have, and I'm really curious for your answers. The first question that actually comes to my mind, or when I go through your life, let's say a bit chronologically, you grew up in the DDR, and I'm sitting here in East Berlin. Can you share anything of your memories? How was that time for you? How did you experience that time?
When you go through life, you don't always think about what it is like or what it could be like or what it might be somewhere else. You live from day to day. And as a child, I lived my life in a small town near Berlin, not even in Oranienburg. Oranienburg was a bigger city. And the biggest, of course, was Berlin. That was always kind of in the background. But the small place where I lived was just a few thousand, less than 10,000 people. And it was actually constructed in the late 1930s when Hitler prepared for war, and they built a airplane factory nearby, and so they needed people who would work in that factory. And so my parents managed to move there. I don't recall what my father would have done at that time. But we had a small house. They called it a Siedling, not even a town. And everybody had a front yard and a backyard, and eventually the years after, we would try to grow as much as we could of vegetable and fruit in our backyard. And my second mother happened to come from a countryside in Poland, so she knew how to grow vegetable and make things grow, basically. And so we always had some potatoes, some corn and tomatoes and things like that. And of course, we also had a few little animals like chickens and geese and ducks. And the children, of course, we had to help raising them. So early in the morning before going to school, I had to go and get some grass for the for the creatures. And of course, as a child, you would oftentimes adopt one of those as your favorite animals. And then it was always heartbreaking when your little bunny wound up in a pot for Christmas. So, we lived life as it came along. We did not worry much about because everybody else was basically on the same wavelength. And it wasn't really unhappy. I can say that it was probably limited in many ways. But, you make the best of whatever there is available and try to get an education and always look ahead for the next step in your life.
Did you understand that time what was happening in whole of Germany?
Well, we did have radio, of course. When I was a teenager, television came along, but we didn't have one. Very few people had a television, and I recall no more than a few times having seen a TV before I left that place, which was Lingeburg, which is between Felden and Oranienburg. Nowadays, I believe the township is actually part of Oranienburg, as you correctly mentioned. But At the time, this was our life. However, when we became teenagers, of course, all of us, boys and girls, we all became apprentices. And so the next bigger industrial town would have been Hennigsdorf, which had two large companies. It was a steel company and electrical appliances, I believe. And most of us would go there to become apprentices. And then, if we were ambitious enough, we would go somewhere else. If we were just the average person, we would stay there for many, many years. Some people, their whole life. Well, as a 14-year-old, I wound up in a steel company, and my apprenticeship was for 3 years. And then I was industrial kaufmann, which is basically a pencil pusher. But office work needed to be done even in a steel company, and that's where I spent the next 7 years actually. So together I was employed basically because even the apprenticeship was part of an employment. We had some days school and some days work, and in those days we would work 6 days a week. So 3 days work, 3 days school in the first year, and then down to the last year, 1 day school and 5 days work. And
Wow.
of course, we had to get there, and from Legerburg to Hennigsdorf was, close to an hour commute. Like everybody else, we would either take the bus or a train eventually. Later on, when a train track was built around the ring barn, I don't remember precisely what it was called, but there was a train on the outside, so that we all walked to the train station and then took the train for half an hour, whatever it took to get to work in Hennigsdorf. And I did that for a number of years until at age 17, I was on my own, and I actually moved to Hennigsdorf to be by myself.
And did you that time already dream of leaving, or was there a certain moment in life when you know, okay, now I have to go?
Well, if you're alone at 17, your main concern is to have a roof over your head and a meal on the table. And uh, preferably a job that will provide both of them. So I happened to be lucky. I found a furnished room nearby, in walking distance, in fact, of the steel company. And I stayed there for a number of years. In fact, that went into the early 60s. And I lived there, worked, but I also wanted more for myself. So to start out with, my children, adults, adolescents would at that time only have 8 years of schooling. Some would go on to high school, but out of our 30, 35 children in one class, less than 5, maybe even 3 would go on to high school. Everybody else would become an apprentice. And so I had to finish my apprenticeship, and I really wanted more. Now I also had to make a living, so I needed to work. And it was possible in those days that we would have evening high school, the equivalency of that. And I was able to get an equivalency diploma in a number of years, going to school late afternoon, and the company allowed us to do that. And there were maybe a dozen or so in one class who also wanted to do more than just the basic education. So 3 years later, I had my equivalency, and technically, I would have been able to go to the university. However, in those days, this was under the communists, the option for me were teaching or farming. And teaching was mainly politics. And farming, well, I wasn't a farmer. Anyway, the land belonged to the government. Workers, every year, we were forced to go out to help the farmers to bring in the crops, which we didn't exactly appreciate because it was not our choice, especially the young, unattached people who didn't have a family. They were the first who were required to go out and dig up the potatoes and do whatever needed to be done. But then we saw the real farmers sitting in the restaurant having beer, and we had to do the work outside, which was not exactly appreciated. On the other hand, it was kind of adventurous. I mean, there was no point in complaining about it. We had to do it. So anyway, my choices were either teaching or farming, which I wasn't interested in. And so that was one of the reasons why I was thinking about leaving the area. Once I was finished with my equivalency, yeah, that was in the early 60s. So by that time, the wall had been built in Berlin, and it wasn't just a subway ride anymore to get out of there. Well, 61, the wall was built, and a friend of mine she was actually engaged to a fellow in West Germany. His family had moved when it was still easy to go. And he was engaged to this fellow in the West, but he could not come to the East because he was studying psychology, and that would not have been able to work the way it did in the West. Here she was in the East, he was in the West. We couldn't get together. Occasionally, since he was West German, he was allowed to come to East Berlin on a daily visit. So they did meet a few times. And then, of course, planning for her to leave. Sure enough, in 63, she was able to escape. And I was devastated because not only was she my best friend, but since I had lived by myself, I had my eye already on, yes, we need to leave from here. We had planned together to go somehow. We had the craziest ideas with the balloon or with the tunnel or all kinds of things because we were kind of desperate. And in those days, there were people who really wanted to get out, and many others resigned themselves to living the life that was possible to live, more or less comfortable in the East. And for of those who wanted to get out, you either had to actually go ahead and do it or forget about it, because otherwise it plays games with your mind and drives you crazy. So one day, my friend had already started studying medicine in Berlin, and then she didn't come home. And we learned that she actually had successfully managed to escape. And of course, I was devastated. But that was even more motivating for me. So I tried to get in contact with her, which I did. And she actually, through the mail, told me how she had escaped. And
Wow.
so I had to try my best to either do the same thing or, the penalty in those days was 6 years in prison. But I don't know if you want me to continue.
Yes, please. My next question would be how, first of all, you were 17. Were there not any more adults you were talking to, like your parents or any family, or were they just afraid and you didn't want to bother them? Or how was that? Like you were 17. Wasn't there any other person you were talking to with your
Well,
plans?
this is a little bit later. At 17, I finished my apprenticeship and I started my high school equivalency. So that took another 3 years. So I was
Sure.
around 20 by that time. And then when the war was built, that was in 61, I was still working. Uh, so 2 years later, we struggled thinking of getting out, and every so often we heard of other people who managed successfully. But then again, of course, I'm sure you are aware that many people either got caught or got killed. So it was a dangerous undertaking.
Okay, you were not 17 anymore, but you were still a young woman. Crazy. Yeah, wow.
Right. Yeah, but I had lived in Hennigsdorf, and so I was aware all I had to do is get to West Berlin if I
Yeah.
could.
Only.
Yeah, but of course there was a wall and there were heavily secured borders, so it was not an easy thing to do. But so this was already in 1963, in May of 63, and for the next few months I was really determined and trying to figure out how can I get out of here myself. And then the last day of August, I actually managed, and it was exactly the day that I had been at the steel company for 10 years. And I did manage to get to West Berlin.
Yes, and please share how. What did you do? Like, what were your plans or thoughts beforehand, and how did you manage it in the end?
You sure you want to hear
Yes,
that
of
story?
course. This is very important and very interesting.
Well, my friend had told me that she had managed to hide in a train. This was the end of summer, and some students from West Berlin, they were able to go. They actually, I think they went to Finland, somewhere outside of East Germany, north of East Germany. And there was a train that would be locked going through East Germany. It would open in East Berlin, let on foreigners basically, go to West Berlin, and then it would be locked again to go through the rest of East Berlin, East Germany to go to West Germany. So there was that little window, East Berlin, West Berlin, and I had gone up to that train station, Friedrichstraße, a couple of times to check things out. And of course, it looked really dangerous. Of course, there were soldiers with guns. And well, one day, was a day or two before I actually left, I was on that platform, and somehow it was possible to get on the platform without being stopped. So I had only my little purse with my passport and the money and nothing else. And so I went on through that platform and I saw the train, and the one that I thought would also stop in West Berlin. But I was way too scared to get in there. So I asked some teenagers from West Berlin who had just come from Finland on their summer vacation. And I said, well, how thorough are the checks? And they said, very thorough. Even a mouse could not hide. And I said, yeah, but my friend managed to escape in a train like that. And so this girl says to me, then how come you are not already on that train? And that was what I needed. The very next day I was on that train. And so while
Yeah.
they're getting on and off, and the soldiers were patrolling, they could have picked me up anytime. They could have said, what are you doing here? And that would have been the end of it, but it wasn't. And I always got credit, my guardian angel, that I was able to escape. So I went into the train, or went into the bathroom, but didn't lock the door. The window was open, and I was behind the door. And there was also a mirror, so when you opened the door, you could see who was behind the door. And the window was open, and I could see out the window police patrolling. But well, they had not to look down and see me. So eventually, this was like 15, 20 minutes later or so, the train started to leave, and a student from West Berlin wanted to use the bathroom. And there I was crouching behind the door, and he opened the door and saw me, and he didn't need to be told why I was there. That was so obvious. And so he was shocked, and he went back to his teammates and told them, hey, we have a stowaway, basically. And I don't know what prompted them, but they did the right thing. They all put their luggage in front of the door, and this young man came back into the bathroom, locked the door, and then when the police came, they knocked on the door, control, come out, and he opened the door, and I could see them, inches away from me, basically. And he went out, showed his passport, and for some reason they didn't look in. So it was incredibly that it wasn't planned that way, but it happened that way. And so I came to West Berlin. They didn't look in. They did not see me at the time. But getting out of the train station, you needed to have a ticket. I didn't have a ticket. However, the whole group, they were like 20 or so students, and for some reason, they had one person less because that person happened to also escape from the East at some time. And so she flew back rather than taking the train and taking a chance. So they were one person short. And so I was that person, even though I was a few years older than most of the others. It didn't matter. And I had nothing with me. I had no luggage, nothing. So they just ushered us through and go, 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 go. Yeah, well, yeah, I was. Of course, there were no more camps or centers for refugees, and I didn't know what to do. And of course, everybody was really quite excited. Oh, we managed to have a refugee here. So he asked me what to do now. I said, I have no idea. And one of the students said, well, my parents are not at home right now. They're on vacation. But if you want, you can come stay with me for a few days, which I did. um, to a few days worked into 2 weeks or so. By that time, I had found a furnished room, and I had was on my way to have a job and make a living. Didn't have anything else. At the time, the West Berlin administration gave us refugees 40 Deutsche Mark, which was enough to get one outfit. So I could go for an interview, but not much else. So, and the worst, of course, was that, yes, I had East German money. I had raided my account and took along everything I could, but it was, a few thousand marks. But there was no official exchange anymore. Nobody would bring East German money. So what do I do now? Well, by that time, I also was required to go to the Allies, to the British, the French, and the Americans, and to get permission to be in West Berlin and to be officially a refugee. Somebody during that process helped me to exchange my money, so at least I had something. And
Helga, it sounds like a really special story. I mean, you grew up in the DDR and you managed to flee in a train and everything kind of fell into place. Do you believe in destiny or was it just luck? How would you describe it that time? I
I
mean,
do.
this story, yeah.
Because you couldn't easily plan it that way. And I mean, many people were caught, many people did not manage. And some people actually who were successful, I met at least one young man in West Berlin who had a hard time now standing on his own feet, making his own decisions, which obviously was necessary in West Berlin, in the free world, basically, because in the East, things were regulated. There were so many things we couldn't do, or, there were limitations. And so it's a different life. But obviously, it depends on the person what you do with the opportunities. For me, it was freedom. I could now do what I wanted, go where I wanted. I could even study if I wanted to. But for this young man, it was frightening and intimidating and whatever. He went back. And of course, he was a great hero in the East because he had turned his back on the West. And I felt so sorry for him because, well, he missed out on a complete different life. He may have had a good life in the East. I don't know. I mean, all my relatives and everybody, all my friends, they stayed there and they survived. And it wasn't such a bad life. I mean, not everything was gray and dark and dangerous, but it was certainly different. I'm sure you have spoken to other people who grew up there. It was a different life, and it wasn't necessarily bad. I mean, the health insurance was free, almost free. Education was almost free for most people. There were options of going on vacation that were very inexpensive. There were some good things in the East as well, if you were able and willing to put up with all the other limitations and requirements and all the ethics that are not normal in a free world.
Would you say that you had a special character trait or a certain resource you had to make all this possible for yourself?
There are some people who are, let me see, there is an American author, Gail Sheehy. I can't think of the title of her book right now, but she writes about people who basically take advantage of opportunities and make things happen. And I think not everybody is able and willing to do it, but some of us are able and willing. And even though the rest of my life hasn't necessarily been that adventurous, I mean, this was something I felt I needed to do, I wanted to do, I wanted more for my life, for myself than living with restrictions, not being able to go where I wanted, not being able to travel. Somehow that must have been in my blood. I really did want to travel. I did want to see the world. I knew staying in the East, that wasn't possible. It was very, very limited. So that was one motivation, clearly.
Oh, yeah. So it was a lot of courage for sure. And maybe also that desire for freedom, if I hear you.
The Spirit of Survival, that is the name of the book. The Spirit of Survival. And it's still relevant in so many ways. And I do remember some of the examples that she had given that rang home so well, that, yeah, I can understand that. But there are other people who don't necessarily want to leave their town or their city or their country and are perfectly happy, which is nothing wrong with. I just wasn't one of them.
You know, here in Berlin, there are still marks on the ground from people who got shot when they tried to flee or climb over the wall. And you were in that moment, like, really, I felt my heart beating so intensely now when you shared the story with the bathroom door in the train. Like, it could have gone completely wrong.
Oh,
What was the
yes.
feeling that moment for you? Were you like just in shock? Were you like, was there kind of certain drive to survive?
Well, your adrenaline is going over time. You are so scared and so excited, and so I can't think of anything else to say. But yeah, it's really quite scary. But then you have to live through, and you have to go through. And sometimes, well, you take a chance and you hope for the best. And I do credit my guardian angel that he or she was with me at the time and made it possible. So yeah, I can't take the credit just for myself. Anyway, I made it
Yeah.
possible.
What a really touching, inspiring story. Thanks for your openness. And then after some time in the West, you then made it to New York.
Yes, just one incident. Many, many years later, I happened to visit Berlin, and I went to the Oberbaumbrücke, I believe, where the spice used to be exchanged, the canal, and they are signs telling the stories of some escapees. And I read this, and on the other side, there was a young couple in their 20s, and I was in my 50s or something like that. And after I read this, I blurted out loud to my cousin and my daughter who were with me at the time. Oh, I must have really been lucky. And these young people came over. Oh, you were one of them? Yep.
Wow.
I was one of them, but I happened to be lucky. Yeah. So then I was in Berlin for a year and a half, and had a job, nothing major. At one point, I did try to at least investigate of what I could do to study. I really would have liked to do some more university education. And it turned out I did actually go to one of those testing sites, and I realized how much I was missing because I was competing with people in the West, and I didn't have the background. Somehow, I guess I was impatient not to do the hard work, what was needed to succeed there. So I gave up on that. However, by that time, I had also somehow managed to, I found a friend who had a friend in California. I learned that it wasn't really that difficult in those days. The American quotas for Europeans were never filled. So there weren't enough people wanting to come at the time. And so all I had to do was filling out some papers, going for an interview, and I got a green card.
Wow.
And so that would have enabled me to come here legally, of course. And I figured 2, 3 years, learn the language, travel around a bit. At least that was on the horizon. That was what was on my mind. Well, obviously things turned out differently. But again, there are other stories that motivated me to a significant degree. We don't need to go into all of them. Anyway, the bottom line is that it was possible. I was in Berlin only a year and a half, and this friend actually wanted to come with me, but she got cold feet, and she never came. Later on, she visited me once in New York. But by that time, I was married, and many years later. So yeah, I came to New York, $100 in the bank, no English, not knowing anybody. The way it worked at the time, yeah, I had a green card, but I also needed a sponsorship. $100 in the bank and a sponsorship. Those were the requirements. And there was an organization, they gave us a sponsorship, but it was a dubious arrangement towards the United States government. It fulfilled the requirement, but we also had to promise them to never ask them for help. So once we were here, we basically were on our own. So in January of 1960, got on a charter flight together with four other young women. All of
Wow.
them were from West Germany. All of them knew English perfectly.
Mm.
I was the only one who didn't. And coming here, so they met us at the airport and they took us to a Midtown hotel, which is still a hotel for immigrants, basically, more or less. And that was the end of their engagement and involvement. And we were basically on our own. And we all had to find a job and do whatever else we needed to do. And all of them eventually went back. They stayed here for a while longer, for a couple of years, one of them even for 10 years. And then they all went back eventually. But by that time, I was married to an American.
But step by step, how was New York in 1965? What was your impression?
Not exactly intimidating. People live here. People are human beings everywhere in the world, no matter where you go. They're human beings. So I found a job as a maid, as a homemaker in Queens with a family of two small children. And both parents were working, and so they needed somebody to clean the house, cook the meals. I had a roof over my head, and I was able to eat with them. They didn't discriminate. I was actually sitting at the same table with them, and they would talk to me, which was
Mm.
very, very, very civilized. They treated me almost like a human being. I'm saying almost because I had Sundays off, but I wasn't even supposed to ask them for a Saturday evening off. I mean, I was in my 20s. I wanted to socialize with other
Mhm.
young people, but that wasn't made easy.
Mm.
They did not want to be restricted by me being away, and then they couldn't spontaneously do what they wanted to do. But I had a roof over my head. I had food on the table, and in the meantime, in New York, most high schools they have classes for foreigners to learn English, which was luckily in my walking distance in Forest Hills. And so I enrolled there immediately, and well, the goal for most foreigners was to learn enough English that they could again earn an equivalency diploma, which I did. And wow, after that, I could actually go to the university. It was awesome. And unfortunately, by that time, I was married and the first child was born. And no, things didn't quite work out that well, but I did manage to get an associate degree over the next few years. But so back to what was New York like? Well, it was a big city, obviously, with lots of opportunities. People are people, they treat you like other human beings. I never felt discriminated in any way. Of course, I had the privilege of being an white European. So I could easily fit in because most Americans, I mean, at some point, they all came from somewhere, right? So I was just one of them.
Mhm.
It wasn't that unusual. There were, of course, many other young people, and there were options of socializing, limited opportunities. But yeah, school and dance. I love to dance. The YMCA had dance classes, and that's where you would meet and socialize.
What advice would you give someone who is trying to start over in a completely new country? What is it what you take away from that if you reflect on that time?
Well, obviously, life is different. So you learn what is different, how do I deal with things. And I mean, the people that I stayed with in Forest Hills, they were average Americans. The parents were working, children were going to school, and during the summer they went on vacation. And of course, I had to stay there. I didn't have a vacation. I had to take care of the empty house for 2 weeks. But it wasn't that bad. You make the best out of your opportunities and you think ahead, well, what do I want to do with my life? And you do as much as you can with the limitations that obviously are in place. But, well, I spoke about the dancing act. That's actually where I met my husband.
Mm.
He was a really good dancer. But after about a year, my family, the family I was working for and staying with, they moved out of the city. So I had to find some other opportunity. And by that time, my English was obviously better. And I once more went to another family, stayed with them for maybe 6 months or so. And by that time, I knew enough people and knew what other options there were. And I teamed up with another young woman and we rented an apartment. And I took a job in a company. It was an import company. They were dealing with Europeans, and German was actually a benefit. So that was my first office employment in New York. But that worked out. But then during that time, I married, and first child was on the way, and so for a while, I did not work. But for other young people, I assume it's usually young people who come. I mean, these days, I realize there are so many people who want to come, and the United States cannot possibly take everybody who wants to come. So I always encourage people to do, if at all possible, do it the legal way. Otherwise, you have just unimaginable trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But then there are so many options here. And the one thing that always impressed me during my professional life is that in the United States, people are giving options for the ability that they can do a job. It's not necessarily what kind of equivalency they have or what certificate or what kind of papers. I was working for Citibank for many years, and the chairman of Citibank was an engineer. He never studied banking, but in this country it was possible.
Hmm.
And we, at one point, when I was working in the computer department, we hired a young man. He was a temp. He was a high school dropout, and he couldn't write a decent English sentence. He was a white American, but he was undereducated in some ways. But he had a knack for computers. He would drive us crazy asking questions all the time. And little by little, I was there for about 2 years, and he was as well working. He worked himself up. By the time I left that department, he was the equivalent of a manager, which was amazing because he was able to do the work. Never mind that he was a high school dropout. And this is so inspiring to me and optimistic. And even now, where we have major problems in this country, there are still so many opportunities, so many immigrants that are coming who are working really, really hard, putting their life on the line, and they are achieving something. It is possible, unlike in many other countries where I suppose, and I mean, I've been out of Europe for so long, but in Europe, it's much more important that you do have the right papers and maybe even the right recommendations. And in this country, there are still many opportunities. If people really want to work and achieve something, they can all do it the legal way. They don't have to cheat anybody or,
Important. That's a very important point you're actually speaking about. It's a lot about titles and degrees and papers here, while sometimes maybe it's only also about the skills or the mindset you actually bring to the table, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the skill are an asset. Everybody has something to give. Nobody should expect to come here and being taken care of. No, you have to contribute to society just like in every other place, and you have to do your share as well.
Helga, how was it being a woman in the tech kind of Citibank scene in the 70s and the 80s? I mean, you had a background in the industrial clerk area and then coming to the Citibank. How was that for you, that shift?
Well, this was by that time it was in the mid 70s, and computers were coming along. And I always thought computers seem to be the future. Maybe my background might be helpful. I mean, office work, basically, not much more. Thought, I can figure things out. Well, anyway, I had my associate degree is actually in computer sciences, but at that time, this was even pre-mini computers. So there were some mainframes way in Maryland, and we had terminals, not exactly dumb terminals, but they looked like typewriters that we would connect with, those mainframes. And then later in the mid 70s, the mini computers came around, and they still are huge, like cabinets, And then in the early 80s, mid 80s, the secretaries were the first who had computers, the desktops on their desk. They were the jazzy typewriters, first electrical typewriters, and then the terminals. And I always felt that computers are probably a useful field to be in. So my associate degree was in computer sciences. We actually had to work with punch cards. We still had to do our final exam in punch cards, learning COBOL and Fortran and all these languages. But being at the beginning and being flexible enough to willing to learn, I somehow managed. I knew I needed to work. When my husband left, I didn't want to be on welfare, so I needed to get my foot into the industry. And I first started temping for a couple of companies and asked, do you have a computer department? Do you need anybody? And Citibank was pretty big at the time, and they were willing to take a chance on me. So I was temping for Citibank. And a few weeks later, they asked, would you want to work for us?
Amazing.
Yes, it was a big company. At the time, there were 90,000 people working for Citibank. There was only one, there were lots of Smiths, but only one Helga Smith. And so I became more and more knowledgeable about the computer industry and what was useful at the time. Eventually, I became the manager for the overseas department. We were dealing with branches in a dozen other countries, and I did that very successfully. I worked for Citibank I worked for them for more than 20 years. And ironically, every job that I had there, I had several jobs. I was always asked, I never was looking for a job, but somehow a job found me. And the last one I did at Citibank was really quite interesting. On the trading floor, doing the presentations for the traders. And it was stressful sometimes, and oftentimes we had to pull all-nighters, but it was quite rewarding. Before that, I also worked for a small service unit for the chairman of the bank. And for somehow I managed to get interested in computer graphics. And so I did the graphics for the chairman, actually. And we had a small unit. At one point, we were almost 20 people, and more than half of them had PhDs. And I was kind of on the bottom of the educational ladder. But obviously, my work was good enough and valuable enough that they liked having me around. And so, yeah, when eventually Citibank was acquired by Travelers and our department disappeared, I decided there has to be life outside of Citibank, and I went somewhere else.
Wow.
Yeah, work at Citibank at some time was really quite fun and interesting and rewarding. And of course, in the meantime, my kids were growing up, and we had to manage to raise them. Uh, well, uh, but they did grow up, and my daughter is now an international lawyer and working for USAID, which unfortunately
Hmm.
is not in business anymore. Yeah, she went to Harvard Law School, which is quite prestigious.
So yeah, that's definitely a completely different chapter again. Before we dive into that one, I want to ask you one more thing. I mean, you had a career in Citibank and got so many different offers and promotions. What would be the advice you would give your younger self nowadays in terms of career? Is there anything, if you reflect on it, any certain skill set or character trait you brought to the table?
Well, for any young person, I would always say get as much education as you can, but also try to educate yourself in something that you like, that you enjoy. And then everything else will fall into place. Just because one or the other job or career might make money, that may not necessarily be the
Hmm.
best for you. I always told my children, yeah, money is important, but it's only as important as what you will do with it.
Mhm.
Just to accumulate and forget it, that is not the goal. Or you need to do something with your skills, your opportunities, and the money that eventually you earn. again, in the United States, there are so many options, and I would encourage anybody. And even though a person may come from a poor background, that does not necessarily mean that they are not smart. Certainly, it has nothing to do with brains,
No, yeah.
but how ambitious they are. Look at J.D. Vance. He came from a very poor background in the Appalachians. He writes about it in his first book, and he became vice president. Not necessarily that I agree that he ought to be there, but I'm sorry. and uh, and and Obama. I mean, I loved Obama. I mean, he is a black person who, for so long, had major handicaps, and yet he made it because he was smart. He has integrity. It's willing to work. I think he did a very good job, as much as it was possible with the limitations that Washington put on him. Again, that's another story. Um, Being at Citibank, it's just like any other environment. You try to make the best of it. Money isn't everything. At one point, I was working at Goldman Sachs, and there is a women's group. They are called 85 Broads, and that is a play up on the headquarters of Goldman Sachs, which happened to be at 85 Broad Street. But I learned that people, even if they don't have the proper environment or schooling, or so if they have the drive, if they want to do something, they can. And well, according to their abilities, I mean, not everybody has to become a Secretary of State or whatever. You can achieve many things if you really want them. You have to make your own way and see the opportunities as they come. It's a comfortable life. I like my life.
Yeah, well, you definitely have a very, very rich life and enriching story. So thanks for sharing so much. Helga, before we get into the current role of a traveler, I definitely want to ask some more questions about motherhood because that's another very inspiring aspect of your story, I would say. Like how old were you when your first child was born?
26, 27.
26. Yeah, wow. And so you had already three children, and then you were a single mother. How did you manage that? Did you have any support? The moment your partner left, you had to face the reality of caring for children and make that
Yeah,
go.
my youngest son was born in 1970s. So yeah, they were 2, 4, and 6, and my ex decided he didn't want a family. So again, you cry a little, you pray a lot, and you take it from day to day. And again, you see what are my options. I wasn't able to go to work right away because I didn't have enough money to pay a babysitter. So for a few years, I actually was on welfare while I was going to school because I knew I needed more education. And so during that time of 3 years, I got my associate degree and I couldn't tell the welfare department. As a matter of fact, at one point, I was careless enough to confide in one of my neighbors. I didn't realize she was working for the welfare department. She promptly denounced me and they cut off my funds. But obviously, I managed to survive uh, until my until I had my associate degree, and I by that time there were some daycare centers that were fairly reasonable that I could manage to have my children, and I managed, but it was very difficult for 3 children, less than 10 years old, to uh, to survive, and me being at Citibank, having a job, a full-time job, and not always being able to go home at 5 o'clock. As a matter of fact, my first job paid less than the welfare would have paid at that
Wow.
time. So I had to manage, and it was really difficult, especially during the summer when the children were out of school for 2 months or more, and I had 2 weeks vacation. So that that was pretty difficult. I managed to take them to the countryside in Pennsylvania during the summer for a week or 10 days or so, just for them to get out of the city and see something else. But it wasn't easy. Obviously, if you have relatives who can help out, that would make it easy, but I didn't have anybody here. There were also some after school programs, centers that come and go. At the moment, I don't really know what people in my situation would be doing because I see very few daycare centers. At that time, they were available and they helped out. Children would still come home 4 or 5 or so, and I was still at the office, but managed.
Wow, very inspiring. Yeah. I mean, I see single mothers nowadays having one child and needing to work and making a living in this economical situation right nowadays. But you did it with three in a new country, in a new continent.
You do what you need to do.
Touched by that.
So
Yeah, well, and what would you say? How did you all manage that? You always say you do what you need to do. How did you have all this strength and this resilience?
I do believe that my religion helps me. I mean, I became a Christian when I was around 10 or so. My first mother died when I was 7, so my father married again, but I was supposed to be a difficult child, so they put me into an orphanage.
Oh, wow.
The cheapest was the Catholic nuns, and my father was atheist, and so they put me into this orphanage, and therefore my role models for a few years were the nuns. So obviously I wanted to be a nun, but of course life has different plans. And when I was 14, my parents were already divorced. But my second mother actually allowed me to stay with her for a number of years. So all throughout my apprenticeship, I was staying with her, but then she kicked me out and I was on my own. But my faith was strong enough that I did rely on God and He was always there. And so I do believe that it surely helped. you know, I don't know what else. Everybody has to find their own way and their own strength and whatever works for you. This worked for me. It may not work for somebody else, but it certainly did for me. And I'm not fanatically religious, but God is always there.
Now you shared another detail of actually partly living in an orphanage and being a single mother, losing your youngest child. But how do you heal from all of this? I mean, there are so many different emotional turmoils connected to these stories. How did you manage that all? I believe in God and your religion is definitely supportive. I get that. I think there must so many ups and downs connected to that. How did you grieve? How did you process? How did you heal from all of these different experiences?
I don't know. I don't really have an explanation or a guideline. In a way, I'm a bit lazy. I do not plan ahead that much. I oftentimes take the opportunities as they come along. But you have to be open to opportunities. You have to be willing to try something you have never done before or go places where you have never been to. So, I don't know. I can't really tell other people how to live. I can only say what worked for me.
So really staying in the moment, having an open heart and step by step moving forward when I hear you correctly.
And these days that I don't have a structured life, I don't go to work anymore from 9 to 5. I still have a freelance job actually, but mostly I do volunteer work. I work with blind people and I work in the park and in lots of NGOs and so on. But it's not structured as it used to be. So again, you do what is meaningful to you. I would like to be even more productive, and I miss that in a way that I feel sometimes, oh, what have I accomplished today? And it's not always something that makes me proud or happy at the end of the day, but you need to balance. You need to do things for yourself as well as for others, and that is very important. Being with my blind friends is so rewarding for me because it is so little effort on my part and it makes such a difference to them. And that makes me feel good. That gives meaning to my life, really. I mean, it may not mean much to somebody else, but yes, it satisfies me, volunteering with others, socializing, or doing things like go hiking. They're always the people that I've already known or meet, or, there's always that aspect
Mhm.
which gives spice to your life. basically.
I understand studies saying that being kind, volunteering, being friendly, giving back has a lot of good impact on our mental health and our psyche. So I definitely understand that having a routine and still doing good for other people is definitely giving a meaning to life, right? So yeah, it's very inspiring to listen to your story. Thank you so much for sharing these parts already. But now, of course, the big part that we still have to talk about, I still want to hear about so much, is in the late 40s, you started traveling. Where did that, I mean, of course, you left the DDR, you wanted to see something else, but where did it start or where did it come from, that interest to explore more?
Again, opportunities, I would say. For almost 20 years, my first priority was raising my children, and I didn't have the time or the money to go to do other things. But eventually, when they were teenagers and I could leave them by themselves, or they were in college, or they didn't need me, as a matter of fact, my blind friend, basically was a motivation. One, she was not completely blind at the time. This was in the late 80s. We were in the church choir, and one day she came to my house and we were chatting. What are you going to do this summer? She says, "Oh, I'm going to the Virgin Islands." Half jokingly, do I say, "Oh, can I come along? We really want you to come along." Well, here was my opportunity, but just for a week, 10 days or so. So we went to the Virgin Islands, and that means St. Thomas and St. Croix. And of course, all her relatives, they treated me like family, even though I was the only pale face around. The islanders, most of them are black, but she was my friend, and so they didn't bother me, and didn't bother them either. And it was such an eye opener to me, and I really like this, exploring things, going to places where you haven't been before. Even in St. Croix, we rented a place at the beach, and but my friends like to sleep late, and so I would go out early in the morning. I was so excited being somewhere else, and I would say hello to the people along the way, and everybody would say, "Hey, man," that's what they say. And I would come back and tell my friends all about what I had experienced. Why didn't you wake us up? Well, I don't wake people up. If they want to get up to explore something, well, that's up to you. But if you don't, I'm going to do what I think I came for. And it was so enjoyable. And of course, also meeting all these people, that was, they live differently, they look differently, but hey, they are really interesting people. And that kind of encouraged me. As a matter of fact, when I came back, well, this was in the late 80s, I was working at Citibank, and we started out with 2 weeks vacation per year, which is not very much.
Mm-hmm.
After 5 years, we got 3 weeks, and then it took a while. Eventually, I actually had 5 weeks, but only for a little while. But during those few weeks, I had to cram in everything that I
Mm-hmm.
could to go someplace and explore. And I decided I'll go at least once a year. I go internationally and maybe the domestic as well. And then, of course, it becomes addictive. The more you do, the more you want to do. And then you meet other travelers. And in the beginning, I would either go by myself or with my daughter. She also was on my wavelength. And so we did some traveling together. And it took many, many years until I finally went with a group, because there are some places I would not want to go by myself. Later on, I kind of became lazy. I didn't want to do all the homework beforehand. And so it was easier to just trudge along with other people. But then I met so many interesting people, and they motivate you, and they were many times they were so educated. Oh my
Mm-hmm.
goodness, it was really a joy. The last few years, the people I traveled with, they were just absolutely wonderful, and some of them, yes, I'm in touch with, and you know, we inspire each other. So yeah, it kind of grows on you. So little by little, I did what I could and wanted to do, and then of course, well, the other major part in the late 80s, I became a member of SERVAS, and SERVAS is a peace organization with NGO status at the United Nations. At that time, again, I didn't have the time or the money to go traveling myself, but being a host is the next best thing. You invite the world into your place.
Mm.
I think it was in 1986 I started to have visitors from servers.
Mhm.
And it took many years until I just couldn't stand it anymore. The people were telling me about their journeys and what they had experienced and whom they had met, and it sounded so interesting. And I finally said, I'm ready to go. I need to go now. And going with servers, of course, it is somewhat different than being a solo traveler and going from hotel to hotel or whatever people manage to travel. But going as a service traveler, you go to somebody's house. And oftentimes, or sometimes, they actually meet you at the train or the
Mhm.
airport, and they take you into their home and treat you like part of the family.
Mhm.
And it was so enjoyable. And I met so many people. Of course, I had hosted many people. And sometimes, once in a while, I would actually go to visit somebody who had stayed with me. And that was always fun. And uh, then of course, this was before computers, before internet, before cell phones. So you had to communicate via long mail. You had to wait until they answer, and well, maybe they'll take you, maybe they don't. In the early 90s, my daughter managed to bike around the world. She had already biked cross country from New York to Vancouver, Seattle, Vancouver. And then a year later, she decided to travel around the world. And starting out in Europe, going through many countries, and then Northern Africa into Asia, Australia, and down the West Coast. And she managed to stay with service people in many
Mhm.
places. By bike, you're independent. You just have to make yourself there, but you need to communicate. You need to have enough skills to find the places, you find the people. And she did. She managed.
I remember some guys I met in India. They were traveling all around India and also Africa by bicycle. I was very inspired, especially when you would travel on the roads with all traffic. It was quite an adventure they shared. Do you remember one or some of the most unforgettable places during your trips?
There are so many. I've only visited a few dozen people, but I have hosted more than 1,000 people in my home. And
Wow.
just recently, there was the Women's Conference at the United Nations. I actually hosted a woman from India who 20 years ago, she, her husband, and her then 8-year-old daughter were biking across the United States. And I do remember meeting them 20 years ago briefly because they happened to come through New York before they went to Europe and did some more biking there. And that was so inspirational to all of us. And they actually did it purposefully. They reported and they wrote stories, and it wasn't just for themselves. But I had not kept in touch with her. When I learned that she was coming as a delegate and asked for hospitality, I remembered, yes, I met her 20 years ago,
Wow.
which was really quite amazing. There are so many occasions in Africa, in some of the places where people are really, really poor, yet they are not necessarily unhappy. They are maybe sometimes even happier than we are in the Western world because they sing and they dance and they take life from day to day with all their ups and downs. And that is always so inspirational to me. Wow, these people know how to live, even though we would consider them poor,
Hmm.
and yet they are smart. And sometimes when I see a child or a woman in the fields with her cell phone, they now have a little business doing this or that. They never have seen a regular landline telephone, but they have jumped all the way to the new technology and make use of it. And so many times they may not be educated in our way, but they know how to live. And most of us probably would have a really hard time if we had been transplanted to where they live at this point. We would have a hard time making a living or just surviving. And yet they do. And they make progress. And I really do have hope for Africa as well, even though they are still struggling, but they will be able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. We sometimes had that discussion with my daughter because she worked for AID, and she was in charge of the projects that are tied to the money that the United States gives to other countries. And on one of my returns from Africa, I picked up a book written by an African woman who, I forgot the title of the book, but she argues that the help that other countries give are not necessarily helping because it does not foster self-reliance. It makes people dependent on what they can get for free, which is not necessarily the best way of advancing their society.
Mhm.
And so she was really forcefully making her point. And when I mentioned it to my daughter, of course, she has the other side. She said, yeah, but in so many ways we did help. And oftentimes when I travel around the world and I see this place has been developed because of USAID, I always take a picture, show it to my daughter. Your colleagues have been here. And I know that she worked really, really hard for more than 20 years to bring a better life to many people in the developing world. And I know she did her best, and in many ways it was really useful and accepted and appreciated. And now that it is not possible anymore, I know that many people will suffer because this is supposed to be the richest country. But if you're only thinking about number one and never mind the poor, I don't think that is supposed to be Christian. And I think it's our obligation to share and not necessarily handouts, not necessarily just to give away and think,
Mm.
oh, you're so poor, you need this and that. That's not necessarily the way to help people. But we have a responsibility to humanity. If we
Mhm.
have more than others, it's up to us to share and to do something so that they too can have a decent life.
I share the same experience and also opinion. I'm wondering, do you think it is because we have seen so much more of the world that we care more?
Those of us who travel, well, I mean, we are human beings. If you see, even if you see on the news and on TV or wherever you see people suffering, doesn't your heart go out? I mean, it could be me. We are lucky. We were born in a place where we have everything we need and much of what we want. These people didn't ask to be born in Gaza or in Ukraine or in Sudan or wherever they are suffering in so many places where they do not have those options, where they really have to struggle from day to day. It's not their fault. Why should they be punished, or why should they not have a share of what we have in plenty?
I share exactly the same experience and also opinion. And I'm wondering sometimes when I share my ideas or my opinion on the world and on these situations here with my circle of people, then a lot of them also don't know what to say, or they don't know exactly what's happening there because they don't consume the media that much, or they have no connection to these places. I'm sometimes wondering, since we all have a heart, we all have life, so isn't that something that is all connecting us and making us empathetic and sympathetic with other people? But do you think it's that we have seen more and have more of a connection to these people because we've been to these places?
Well, of course they are good and bad, and I don't want to label people bad. Just that some maybe more selfish than others. Um, People are generous in any place. And because we're all human beings, I recall when I was in Vietnam. Vietnam has suffered quite a bit under the Americans, but also over the years of the Chinese. And when I asked them, whom do you hate more, the Americans or the Chinese? To my great relief, they said the Chinese, and I was hoping that they didn't just say that out of politeness, because they did suffer badly for what America has done to them misguidedly. Unfortunately, it took way too long until for America to wake up and say, "Hey, this isn't right. We shouldn't be doing this." Then finally things changed. But yeah, we have done a lot of harm to the world as well. But so have other countries, and I believe that almost every country has some skeletons in the closet. And
Mhm.
sometimes I just wonder, like in Sudan, why on earth do people kill each other?
Mhm.
What is the meaning, the motivation? Why can they not just live peacefully with each other? It does not make any sense to me, and it is gut-wrenching. You feel so helpless in many ways. In my little way, I feel by accepting people from all over the world into my house, I show them Americans can be human beings too. They are not just what the government does or says. We are human beings just like you. And we may have different opinions. I just had a young man from Egypt there who left this morning. And yeah, we did have different opinions about some things, but he's a human being. I treat him like one and try my best to make his visit here enjoyable in whichever way I can.
I see. I completely understand. In what way has travel or seeing the world changed your perspective on life and maybe also people?
Well, in many ways that I feel I am more accepting, more tolerant, because I see everywhere in the world people have issues, have to deal with difficulties. Many of them seem much, much more than we have to even think about. Last year, I was privileged enough to go to practically all of the islands in the Pacific Ocean, and some of them are so limited. They have practically no arable land at all, so they have to import most of their food. And most of it is processed, and therefore the people are huge. Nauru, one of the poorest countries in the world, is also the most obese. And as sad as it is, I can't really blame them because what kind of options do they have? They cannot grow healthy food for themselves. And what is in the stores is really expensive. They have to live the way they can, the best they do. It's sad to see them, these huge people. And it's so unhealthy. You wish we would have other options, but I don't know what I can do. Or I can just understand more. Of course, I never knew about all the quote theater in the Pacific and after the Second World War and during the war. That was also a learning experience. I was not aware. I didn't learn it in school, and I did not explore those subjects on my own over the years, but being there, being exposed to some different culture and hearing some of the things that have happened, it makes me understand much more what they have to deal with and the suffering they had to do over the years. Again, I always hope that they will pick the best options for themselves and make the best of it.
Helga, what was the most rewarding or most beautiful experience you had around the world?
I would really have to think about it. I mean, climbing Kilimanjaro was very rewarding to me because I did it as a fundraiser and it helped so many people in Tanzania. When I was working at Goldman Sachs at the time, and I met a woman who in her mid-30s. She had overcome major health issues and started climbing mountains, and she had actually climbed all the highest peaks in all the continents,
Wow.
including Antarctica, which was really amazing. And at the time, she was actually going together with 5 American women. They were going up to Mount Everest, and the Discovery Channel was covering them. So we daily got the status of their progress, and it was so inspiring. And she too had done all of those climbs for charitable reasons. So she had always done fundraisers. And as a matter of fact, when she had done fundraising for some schools in Nepal for girls. And when she came to Nepal, these girls were lining up and they had a banner that said, "Welcome 85 broads." Surely they did not know what a broad in English means. It is not a nice word for a woman, but because she was part of the 85 broads women's network at Goldman Sachs, that's what they were called. And it was so inspiring that I too decided I had already planned on going to Kilimanjaro, but it took me a while to come to the conclusion, oh yeah, I need to do this for somebody else, not just for myself. And so I decided to do some fundraising. After all, Americans are quite generous in supporting races, bike races. Why can't I climb a mountain and have it benefit somebody else? And so I made up a flyer, said who I am, what I want to do, and whom I want to do it for. And I had to choose an organization, not too political, not too religious, not to this or that. So I made up my flyer and I went to all my friends and relatives, and then, of course, to Goldman Sachs. And I raised $10,000, which
Wow.
was given to the women in Tanzania. And therefore, I was motivated to get all the way up to the top of it. It wasn't easy. And many people still die on that mountain every year, even local people. My daughter and I, we motivated each other, and we had agreed that if one of us doesn't make it, the other one will go. And of course, we both made it. So that was a kind of an accomplishment I felt at the time.
How long did it take you?
6 days. There are many routes to go up there. I took the quote easiest, but you still need to go up 95 kilometers and almost 20,000 feet. It's not an afternoon walk. And ironically, those who don't make it, and quite a few don't make it, the largest group is young men in their 20s to 25, because piece of cake, anybody can do it. No, not necessarily so.
Yeah.
It is a difficult thing to do if you put your mind to it. Yes.
I remember I also went to Kilimanjaro. I didn't do the whole tour. I just did half of it. But I remember it was a beautiful trip. What do you remember? What was the feeling when you were up there? Like, how did you feel about it?
Well, what was so amazing is meeting all these people from all over the world, and we were all on the same quest. We all had to do the work, the walk and the heights, and as difficult as it was, we made it. And when you come to Gilnit's Point, you are at the rim, and many people think, "Oh yeah, that's it." And then you see way, way over there, that's the highest point, and that's another 2 hours away.
Yeah.
My daughter and I, and we had to hire a guide, assistant guide, a cook, and two porters each, so seven
Yeah.
people that were supporting. But the actual climb from the Rambo camp to the top, the ascent, there was just my guide, myself, the assistant guide, and my daughter. My guide was going really fast, and I would go as quickly as I could, and then I had to stop and catch my breath. And my daughter was going slow and steady until she caught up with me. And then she said, "You better go ahead. I don't want you to get cold." It was really freezing up there. But I was hoping that she would make it. And sure enough, 15 minutes later, she made it as well. And then we could go the rest of it together just with my guide. But being up there is really being on top of the world.
Did you
But
prepare?
well, of course we needed to have some nourishment, but you have no appetite at all. But you hug each other, you take a picture, and then you quickly go down because you can't stay up there for too long. It just deteriorates your muscles. And so we were probably no more than 20 minutes or so up there. And then we had to go down this green field. Theoretically, we knew you're supposed to ski down on your heels, but our guide had not shown that to us. And so we painfully walked step by step down to the next
Oh.
camp. And we were not allowed to stay there because the next people who were going up needed those beds. On the same day, we had to go down all the way to the next camp. Ooh, that was a long day and was really tough, but we made it. And as we were going down, people were coming up and they congratulated us. And I finally said, "How do you know we made it?" And he just said, "Oh, it's obvious."
On your face.
Whatever. We must have glowed. It was quite an accomplishment. And after that, we treated ourselves to a safari in
Oh,
Tanzania.
yeah, that's also beautiful. How old were you when you did the Kilimanjaro?
62.
62.
I was 62. Yeah. And I'm sure I was not the only.
Out of my dad died last year of brain tumor at the age of 63, and you're 20 years older, and you still managing. I mean, of course, you haven't been to Kilimanjaro now, it's like 20 years ago, but still, how do you keep so fit and healthy? What is your routine?
Well, you eat properly, hopefully healthy, more vegetarian than meat-based. I'm not a complete vegetarian. My daughter is vegan, but I'm only vegan when she is around. But I do try to eat healthy, very little processed food, or certainly no cookies and candies and junk food. Exercise, definitely. I don't run marathons anymore, but I
Anymore?
do. No, I ran 3 marathons, and
Wow.
that it was actually before Kilimanjaro.
Hmm.
Then I didn't want to put in the effort anymore. And there was no more challenge. And I felt, what do I need to prove? But these days I walk. I walk an average of like 6 miles a day at least. But we go hiking and yeah, I do my stretches and do some weight training. And that's important. So healthy diet, exercise, and socializing. You cannot just live for yourself. You need to have contact with people. Most of us do. I mean, very few will flourish being isolationist or, hermits. No, I do really believe that we belong in this world, that we are part of this world, but we also have to partake. We need to socialize with other people. Many of my travels, many of the trips, I give presentations so that I can share it with other people. Many people will not go. I know, but they don't mind looking at my pictures and learning something about places that they will never see in person. And that it's enjoyable for me as well, going back to kind of relive my experience, but also it forces me to learn a little more about geography, history, and whatever else may be relevant to tell my audience. And I do that every so often.
It's very inspiring. Thanks for sharing. When did it become a goal to see all the countries in the world?
It gradually grew on me when I met so many people that actually had done it. And 2 years ago, we were visiting Libya, which had been out of limits for a long time. We were a group of 12 people, and out of those 12, three actually had been to every other country, including North Korea, a long time ago.
Wow.
And Olivia was the last one. As a matter of fact, one of these women, of these three, I knew from when she was giving presentations many years ago. We have a place downtown where people would congregate and give presentations. Most of them were about travels, but not all. But I wouldn't say she inspired me, but she reminded me how much fun that was. And she was one of the three who Libya was the last country. And it was so fascinating. Here you have these three people. Wow, they have really been to every single country in the world. I mean, I had already been working towards that goal, after you meet a couple of people and you realize that it may be possible. And yeah, I still do want to. I've only 3 more to go, and I hope to be able to. But if not, okay, so what? But still, it's kind of fun doing something like that. There are only a few hundred people in the whole world who have done that.
Wow. Which countries are left for you?
On my list, well, North Korea, where I cannot go, Haiti, where at the moment it's not wise to go to because people get killed every day, and Jamaica, which I just haven't gotten to yet, but I will in the next couple of months, sometime this year, definitely. Haiti, I hope to get to as well, and North Korea, well, that's easy, obviously, depending on politics.
Hmm.
Unfortunately. But, if it happens, great. If not, I can live with it.
Okay. And how long do you stay? How long are these trips normally?
That depends. I try to stay in a small country like El Salvador. I went to in January, at least a week, That gives you an idea that allows you to cover a few highlights. These days, I don't want to be away from my home for too long, partially because of my plants, my terrace. You have seen my terrace, but that
Yeah.
requires some work. But I want to be at least enough that I get an impression of what this place is like. And I would never only go to an airport and claim that I have
Yeah.
visited that country. That doesn't work for me. So I would prefer longer periods. And in some places, no, I haven't really been very long, except for Spain. Now that my daughter lives in Spain, I go every year for a couple of weeks. But I always have to find somebody to take care of my home in the meantime. uh,
Hmm. Wow. And from all the countries you have been to, if you could live anywhere in the world besides New York, where would it be and why?
Berlin
Berlin?
Berlin might be a place. I think, as a matter of fact, I could live in many other places if I have enough reason. But I like New York. You know, I have my place here, I have my friends here, I have everything I want here. I don't really have enough reason to live somewhere else. But yes, Berlin is a place that I really enjoy being at whenever I go. And obviously, where I came from, kind of in my backyard. So, yeah, there are other places that I really enjoyed. Istanbul is one of them.
Mm.
You know, if I think hard enough about it, yeah, there are other places, but I like being here. I have limited time to explore in depth, and I'm probably not willing to uproot. If I were a little younger, maybe I would go either working for what used to be the Peace Corps, or would find some places where I can be useful and contribute, you know, and that could be anywhere. No, I think I'm kind of past that. I'm not really willing to put that much hardship on myself.
I understand.
Sometimes I do meet people. I recently had a woman from France who goes around the world helping other people. And that again, that appeals to me. Yes, if I was a bit younger, I probably would do that. But at the moment, no.
One more question regarding traveling. So, if people are listening to us today and they would like to travel more, but they feel a bit held back, what kind of advice would you give them?
Get over it. If you really want to travel, if you want to explore, go ahead, close the door and go on the road and go wherever you want to be or what appeals to you or what interests you. It is definitely a life experience. In every travel, I always learn something. And of course, it's the people that you meet. You know, there are so many faces that I recall that really impressed me. And there was hardly ever any negative side of it. Most of the time it was wow, it was educational, inspirational. Going to Papua New Guinea and coming back was horrendous. It was really miserable. But being there was fabulous. Seeing these people and learning about their culture. I mean, how can you write that off? You can't catch that from books or from TVs or from videos or so. You have to be there. You have to hug somebody. You have to take their hand. You know, you
Mm.
have to follow them and listen to their stories and see what how they live. And most of the time, it's enjoyable and educational and well rewarding.
Yeah.
I just have to do it.
Do you remember one of the countries, the most beautiful countries in terms of landscape you have been to?
Oh, yeah. Years ago, I used to answer the question when people asked me what was the most enjoyable country. The last one I visited, but of course, it doesn't work so well anymore. But there are a few that definitely stay out. Like one of the most beautiful is Bhutan. The landscape, those snow-capped mountains, and the people. It's really, and of course the architecture. Oh my goodness, that is so awe-inspiring. What they have done hundreds of years ago. They were so smart. I can't imagine if people today being able even to do something like this that they have done a long time ago. But also Samoa. I love Samoa. Of course, it helps that I know some people there. The first time I went there was exactly 25 years ago.
Wow.
And I was there again last year, and I met the same people who still live there, and they still valued my visit. Every day they kept saying, "We're so happy you are here." I mean, their life is not that exciting from day to day. But when somebody comes, especially somebody they already knew, Samoa is a beautiful country, and the culture is very interesting and I just love it there. But South Africa is also a
Mm.
very, very nice country. But again, in many ways, to me, it's oftentimes the people that I
Mhm.
meet. South Africa has beaches and mountains and everything in the game parks and so many things in between, but it's the people that you meet
Mhm.
uh, you socialize with and that you learn from.
I can
What's your
definitely.
favorite country? Do you
My
have a
favorite. They differ between culture and landscape, I would say. I think what was very special for me is definitely also a lot of African countries, Tanzania, Namibia, but I also really liked Laos or Indonesia, like Sumatra, Java. Australia is also, of course, beautiful. And I really, really loved Mexico and
okay?
Brazil, like Latin American countries or South America is very beautiful. I think there are a lot of very beautiful countries. I mean, I haven't been to all or not as many as you have. I mean, I'm working on it too. I have some years left. I mean, you started traveling by the end of 40, so I already have done some, but I can definitely share that wish to see a lot thing. Well, Helga, I'm really inspired by your story, and I'm so thankful that I had the opportunity to talk to you today. After so many different experiences, like you have been through so much change, so many shifts, like war, political, and also technology revolutions, let's say. What do you think is one of the biggest lessons from it all, if you would summarize it for yourself?
Well, things come and go. There are ups and downs. Uh, we may not always appreciate what's happening at the time, but just keep in mind we're all human beings. We are all here for a reason, but we also have a purpose, and finding that purpose, and not just thinking of yourself, just uh, leaving some for your neighbor as well. That's important. You have to balance life with enjoying it for yourself, but also to give to the world. And that's important. And if we all do our little share, we might actually build a better world.
What would you say to people? Because I think a lot of people nowadays are a bit lost due to politics, war, economy. What would you advise them how to find their purpose again?
I don't know. I depend on my religion that gives me strength and that encourages me to do what I think ought to be done and what is right. Not everybody has that way of thinking, and they help. Everybody has to find their own way, but just keep in mind you're not living just for yourself. So help if you can help somebody else, please do, and be it here in your own environment. What did Gandhi say? Start with your immediate environment, your family, your city, your country, before you can go into the world. Think globally and act locally. That's what he said.
Yes, yes, I think that's very beautiful. And if you could go back to your 25-year-old self, let's say, with all the wisdom and reflections you have now, what kind of advice would you give to the younger Helga?
Look for the positive, wherever it will be. I don't dwell on the negative. Overcome and strive for a better world.
That's also very strong. Thanks. And now you have done so many things, you have accomplished so many things, you have really been through so many changes and struggles. Well lived. How does it look to you, or what does it mean to you?
Well, even now, with so many difficult situations all over the world, and we are being right in the middle, I feel it is a phase, and we will get over it, and we will come out hopefully better than we went in. We have to struggle with all these issues that seem sometimes unsurmountable, but we will get through this, and hopefully there will be enough dedicated people and idealistic people and honorable people who will do the right thing for all of us. But I'm optimistic. I'm always hopeful that
Mhm.
at the moment, now there are many things that are worrisome, that are scary, and that are really disturbing. We will get through this as well.
I always think by also understanding the history and the past, right? So, with everything you've been through from 1940s, what is your take on the future?
You ask me philosophical questions. I'm not a philosopher. As I said, I hope for the best, and I do think that we will overcome our difficulties. People are smart, and most people are good people, and I just hope that those that are doing the right thing at the moment, they will eventually wake up and learn their lesson and see, hey, this is not good for all of us. This is not the way it should be. Let's work together. There will be I'm not sure, a peaceful world because we have had wars almost since humankind. We ought to come to the sense. I don't see a gloom and doom in the future. I see a bright future.
Also with Trump in the US.
Never mind.
It's just a short period, right? And then someone else is going to be there.
Hopefully, rather shorter than longer.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Helga. Really, thank you for all your knowledge and wisdom. It was a really pleasure. Maybe one more thing, because I really also like to for people to take away something. If you would write a book, let's say, about your life, how would it be called?
I'm not going to. I've been many times been encouraged to write a book. No, I will not, because in a way, I feel I'm just an ordinary person. I really don't see that much special in my life. Everybody has something special about them. Everybody has ups and downs, and we all deal with them. The main reason, actually, for not writing a book, I'm really bad in lying. And to make it appealing, you have to embellish things and experiences. I am able to report things as they were, as they happened, but I don't want to write them in a way that may be appealing to the reader. So no, I'm not going to write a book.
I can definitely assure you, to me, it sounds like a very interesting life story, and it's definitely worth a book. But I get it that at one point you have no idea of writing one, or not the energy or effort to put in it. I get that. But maybe one more thing, if now, let's say, this video is listened or watched by a lot of people, what would be your one message you want to leave behind, or you want to share with the world?
Live your life to the fullest. Make use of your opportunities, and on the way, also take those along that come into your life. Enjoy them as well.
Beautiful. Thanks. Thank you so much, Helga. And how are you feeling now?
Great.
I really enjoyed it too. Thank you so much.
A pleasure.